Some men spend their whole lives trying to prove they belong at the table. I spent mine quietly planting the seeds, tending the roots, and watching the orchard grow while the world looked the other way and called it nothing but dirt and debt. Remember that, because everything that follows makes a lot more sense when you understand that about me. It was a Tuesday morning in early October, Green Hollow, Vermont. The kind of crisp fall morning where the air smells like wood smoke and ripe Macintosh, and the sky looks like God took a fresh bucket of that perfect Champlain Valley blue and just let it dry slow. Leaves turning burnt orange and deep crimson along the back roads that wind through the orchards, the kind of color that makes you pull over just to look. I was in the equipment shed behind the old white farmhouse on the 212-acre piece we'd always called home, elbow deep in the hydraulics of a 1998 Ford 8N tractor I'd been nursing since the Clinton administration, when my phone buzzed on the workbench. Emily, my daughter, calling at 9:47 on a Tuesday. Girl's supposed to be at her part-time gig at the library in town, or maybe shuttling the kids to school, almost never this early. I wiped my hands on a rag that had seen better decades and answered, "Hey, Em, what's up, sweetheart?" Silence at first, then breathing. The kind of breathing a grown woman does when she's trying real hard not to fall apart in front of her old man. "Dad," her voice cracked on just that one word and my whole chest tightened like someone had cinched a belt around it. Can you just come to the house? Derek's here." "It's bad." I was already pulling the keys to the old blue pickup off the hook. "Don't move, I'm on my way." I found her on the back porch of the farmhouse, the one with the wide plank floorboards I'd sanded myself back in '98 when Emily was still in high school. She was sitting on the swing I built for her mother 31 years ago, shoulders caved in like something invisible was pressing down on them. Next to her, little Lily, 8 years old, backpack on her lap, eyes wide and quiet the way kids get when they know something is wrong but nobody's told them what yet. She had a half-eaten apple in one hand, a northern spy I'd picked fresh that morning, and her grandfather's old Green Hollow Fire Department cap on her head, the one I gave her last Christmas. 6-year-old Jack was inside somewhere, probably glued to a tablet because the adults were too busy combusting to notice. 2 suitcases sat at Emily's feet. 2 suitcases. Oh Lord, I didn't say anything at first. I sat down on the other side of Lily, put my arm around my granddaughter, and looked out over the south orchard for exactly 4 seconds. The trees were heavy with fruit, rows of Empire and Cortland, stretching down toward the river like soldiers standing guard. Then I looked at my daughter. "Why isn't Derek at work?" Emily laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind that comes out when everything hurts so bad that laughing is the only thing left. "He quit his latest project meeting to come here and handle this. He got the appraisal back on the land, Dad. He's been talking to people in Boston. Turns out he knows some investors. He's the one pushing the sale. He got the bank to freeze the equity line I had on my half of the deed." The river kept moving slow in the distance. Leaves kept falling soft onto the grass. Lily kept chewing her apple like the world wasn't quietly combusting around her. "Derek Langford," I said, "your husband, my former son-in-law, if he kept this up." Emily's jaw tightened. "He filed separation papers this morning. Told me if I didn't sign the land over for the condo development, he was cutting us off completely. Said our bloodline, the Whitaker bloodline, wasn't cut out for anything bigger than selling apples at the farmer's market on Saturdays. Bloodline. I sat with that word for a moment, just let it sit there between us like something that had been dropped and nobody wanted to pick up. "Dad," Emily finally looked at me. Her eyes were red. I don't know what I did. I gave that man 10 years. I moved to Boston with him when he got that first big development deal. I hosted every Langford family dinner. I smiled through every golf club dinner where they called you the dirt farmer right to my face, and he just threw us out like we were nothing, like Lily and Jack were nothing. Lily looked up at the sound of her name. "Grandpa," she said seriously, holding up the core of her apple. "It's a little sour, but still good." I looked at that little girl, her mother's eyes, my wife's nose, 8 years old and completely unbothered because she trusted that the adults around her had it handled. "She's right to trust that, Em. Grandpa's got it handled." I stood up slow, deliberate, the way I do when my mind is already 3 moves ahead and my body's just catching up. "Grab the suitcases, kids too." "We're not doing this on the porch." Emily blinked. "What?" "The suitcases, Em. Grab them." I reached down and took Lily's hand. "Jack," I called inside. "Come on out here, buddy. We're going for a ride." Derek came storming out the side door then, charcoal suit still on from whatever Boston meeting he'd left early, silver at the temples, looking every bit the slick developer who'd spent the last decade telling anyone who'd listen how he was elevating Vermont real estate. "Harlan," he said, voice already edged with that practiced Boston condescension. "This isn't necessary. We can talk like adults. The offer is fair market value plus 20%. The condos will bring jobs, tax base." I didn't even look at him. "Get in the truck, Em. Kids in the back seat." Derek's face went tight. You're making a mistake. That land is worthless as a farm. The soil reports truck, I said again, voice level. Derek knew that voice. Every man who'd ever underestimated me eventually learned it. He grabbed Emily's arm. She pulled away. Lily and Jack climbed in without a word. Emily followed. I shut the door behind them. We drove west on Route 7, then cut north onto the back roads that snake through the Champlain Valley. Emily kept looking at me sideways from the passenger seat, waiting for me to explain, waiting for me to say something reassuring or emotional or fatherly. I turned on the radio instead. John Prine, appropriate. Dad, she said after 10 quiet miles, you're scaring me a little. Good. I checked the mirror where the kids were watching the orchards roll by. Means you're paying attention. Where are we going? Home, I said, the real one. 32 years I kept this quiet. 32 years of early mornings before the sun hit the frost on the rows, late nights in the packing shed, handshake deals with processors up and down the Northeast, reinvested profits funneled through 3 different LLCs, nobody ever connected back to the modest white farmhouse on the modest 212 acres. Not my neighbors, not my brother down in Rutland, not even Emily's mother, God rest her soul, though she knew enough to smile when I'd come in smelling like diesel and cider must and say, Harlan, you're up to something again. Not the full picture anyway. 32 years of being the man in the faded Carhartt jacket, driving the 2006 Ford pickup, because I watched my own father lose everything the moment the bank knew what he had in the ground. I wasn't making that mistake. But Derek Langford just made a different one. He looked at my daughter, my blood, my grandkids, and decided we were beneath him. He pulled strings to destroy the only stability Emily had built. He broke up my daughter's family. He sent my grandkids to sit on a porch with 2 suitcases on a Tuesday in my valley. We pulled off the county road onto a long private drive behind a facility that stretched nearly 600 acres of production orchards, packing houses, cold storage, and 3 distribution hubs that fed straight into Hannaford, Market Basket, and every major Northeast chain from Boston to Burlington. The sign above the main gate was clean steel lettering, understated, professional, Whitaker Legacy Orchards and Cider, no fanfare, just the facts. Emily sat up straight. Dad, what is this place? I parked the old pickup right in front of the main office, a low, practical building with solar panels on the roof, and a view of the production floor where forklifts moved pallets of fresh-pressed cider and grated apples like clockwork. I cut the engine, sat there for just a moment looking at what 32 years of silence had built. This, I said, is your inheritance, and we've got a board meeting to reschedule. She had no idea what that meant yet, but Derek Langford was about to find out. There's a particular kind of silence that fills a room when people realize they've been underestimating someone their entire life. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it just settles, like frost after the first hard night in October. I've been living inside that silence my whole life. Derek Langford was about to get introduced to it. Wednesday morning, 6:45 a.m., I was already at the main packing facility before the first crew clocked in. That's a habit I built in my 30s and never broke. You want to know the health of an operation, don't look at the quarterly reports. Look at who shows up first and who leaves last. I'd been showing up first for 32 years. My office was on the 2nd floor corner room, windows overlooking the grading lines and the cold storage bays below. Nothing fancy. A desk made from reclaimed barn wood, 2 chairs, a whiteboard covered in numbers that would have made Derek Langford's eyes water if he'd ever bothered to look past the Dirt Farmer label. I kept a framed photo on the corner of the desk, Emily at 12, holding up a bushel of Northern Spy she'd picked herself, grinning like she just conquered the world. I looked at that photo every single morning. Today it hit different. My operations manager, Russell Tate, knocked twice and walked in at 7 o'clock sharp. Russell was a big, straight-talking man from Addison County who'd been with me for 21 years. He knew every row, every contract, every quiet LLC. He also knew without being told when something was in motion. He took one look at my face and sat down. Coffee first, or should I just brace myself? Pull the Langford development account, I said. Russell's eyebrows went up exactly a 1/4 inch. The mixed-use project up near the river, they're not even a direct vendor yet. They're still in permitting, that's the one. They're shopping for local ag partnerships to sweeten the Act 250 application. They want our cider branding on their farm-to-table marketing. $1.8 million projected annual supply contract if they break ground. I almost smiled. Almost. Derek Langford had spent the last 2 years bragging at every family dinner about his visionary luxury condo development, 80 units on former dairy land he'd scooped cheap, without ever mentioning that the only way his numbers sang was by tying it to local agriculture tax breaks and branding. The man called my bloodline unworthy while trying to hitch his wagon to my apples. I'm not canceling anything yet, I said. Russell paused. Okay, I'm restructuring the proposal. Pull every clause related to environmental impact and water rights. I want a formal letter drafted. Standard language, nothing aggressive. Notifying Langford Developments that Whitaker Legacy is conducting a comprehensive supply chain evaluation effective immediately. All preliminary agreements paused pending review. It's in the MOU they sent last month, page 7, section 3. I knew because my lawyers had written it that way on purpose. They've got 30 days to respond before we determine partnership continuation. Russell nodded slow, the way a man does when he understands that what sounds routine is anything but. And who's heading the evaluation? I picked up the framed photo of Emily, set it back down facing me. The new director of business development. Russell blinked. We do as of this morning. Emily answered on the second ring, voice groggy. She and the kids had slept in the guest wing of the main house on the corporate campus, the one with the big kitchen and the view of the sunrise over the orchards. Lily and Jack curled up like puppies in the king bed, while Emily folded herself around the edges. Dad, it's early. It's almost 8. I didn't sleep much either. Fair enough. Harry, the kids. A pause. I heard her shift, probably checking on them. Still out, sleeping like nothing happened. Her voice softened. Kids, man, that's because they know they're safe. I let that land. You both are. You understand me. Dad, Emily. I said her name the way I used to when she was 16 and getting in her own way. I need you to listen to me very carefully right now, okay? Not as my daughter, as a grown woman who's about to step into something real. Silence on the line. I need you at the main office by 10, business casual. We're going to walk the floor together. I'm going to introduce you to the team, and then we're going to sit down, and I'm going to explain to you what I've been building and exactly what your role in it looks like going forward. More silence. Then, Dad, what is Whitaker Legacy? I thought it was just the farm. Oh, sweetheart, it's ours, has been for 32 years. I picked up my coffee. 10 o'clock, don't be late. I hung up before she could ask another question. She needed to see it to believe it, some things you can't explain over the phone. She walked through the front entrance at 9:58. I was standing on the production floor when she came in, watched her through the glass before she saw me. Watched her stop just inside the lobby, look up at the 40-foot ceilings, the conveyor lines and precision graders and cold storage bays running in organized rows. 180 employees moving with the kind of synchronized purpose that only comes from years of culture building. Her mouth was open slightly. Good, that's the right reaction. Russell met her at the door and walked her to me. When Emily reached me, she looked like a woman trying to solve a math problem in her head that kept coming out too big. Dad, she looked around, then back at me. This whole time, you drove a 2012 Subaru. Still do. Your mother knew. I paused. She knew enough. She knew the important parts. She also knew why we kept it quiet. Money changes people, Em. The wrong people find out what you have, and suddenly everybody's got a handout and a reason and a story. I started walking, and she fell into step beside me. I wanted you to stand on your own first, build your own confidence, know that whatever you became it on your own merit. She was quiet for a long time as we walked the floor. Workers nodded at me. A few introduced themselves to Emily. A woman named Carol from the cider pressing line shook her hand and said, "You look just like your daddy when he was your age, same fire in the eyes." We ended up in my office. I closed the door, poured us both coffee, and spread 3 folders across the desk. Financials, org structure, and the Langford Supply MOU. Emily picked up the last one. I watched her face as she read it. Watched the moment she registered the company name. Watched her jaw tighten. Langford Developments, she said quietly. That's Derek's company. He's been trying to partner with you. He's been trying to use us. Has been shopping the idea for 9 months without knowing whose name was on the deed. The room was very quiet. Then Emily said with a calm that honestly impressed me, "What's in the folder?" A supply chain evaluation notice. Agreements paused pending review. I slid it toward her. Standard procedure, and who's conducting the review? I slid the second document across, a formal offer letter, Director of Business Development, Whitaker Legacy Orchards and Cider. Compensation package that would have made her old library salary look like spare change. Her hands were very still on the desk. Dad, I've never done anything like this before. You hosted every Langford family dinner with your whole chest, I said. You smiled through every insult and still showed up for your kids. You know how to show up, Emily. That's 70% of leadership right there. The rest I'll teach you. She stared at the offer letter for a long moment. Come on, sweetheart. Pick it up. She picked it up. When Derek gets that evaluation notice, she said slowly, he's going to know something's wrong. He's going to make some calls, I agreed. He's going to ask around, and eventually he's going to figure out whose orchards he's been trying to brand his condos with for 9 months. Emily looked at me. And then what? Oh, that's the best part. Then, I said, he's going to have to call you. The silence that followed was the most satisfied silence I'd felt in 32 years of building something in the quiet. Emily set the offer letter down, picked up a pen from my desk, signed it. The Langford evaluation notice went out at 4:47 p.m. that Wednesday. By Thursday morning, I had 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. I recognized it. I let it go to voicemail every time. He wasn't ready to talk to me yet. He needed to talk to Emily first, and Emily, for the first time in 2 days, was sleeping just fine. Emily was standing when Derek walked in, not sitting behind the desk trying to look powerful. Standing, relaxed, jacket on, hands easy at her sides. The office was clean and quiet, afternoon light cutting through the Vermont gray outside the windows, the production floor humming at steady rhythm below like a heartbeat that had never once skipped. She looked, if I'm being completely honest, like a woman who had been there her entire life. Derek stopped in the doorway. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted from the hallway where I stood just out of view, close enough to hear everything, far enough to let my daughter have her room. Emily, Derek's voice was careful, measured, the voice of a man who'd walked into a room expecting one thing and was already quietly recalibrating. I got the notice. Look, I think there's been some misunderstanding about the supply partnership. We've been in preliminary talks for months, and I think if we just talk through the numbers, the relationship has always been mutually beneficial. There's no misunderstanding, Emily said. Not loud, not sharp, just final. Whitaker Legacy conducts regular supply evaluations. It's standard procedure. It's in the MOU you sent, page 7, section 3. Silence settled over the room like fresh concrete. Emily, Derek's voice dropped a register, softer now, the involuntary softness of a man feeling the floor shift beneath him. Look, I understand things between us are complicated right now. I understand there are emotions involved, and I'm not dismissing that, but business is business, and I don't think we need to let personal matters cloud what has been a very productive, professional. You're right, Emily said. Business is business, Derek paused, hadn't expected agreement, which is why I want to be completely professional about what happens next. I heard movement, the quiet slide of a folder across a desk surface. There it is. I've had our team prepare a revised supply agreement, Emily continued. New terms, restructured pricing, realistic volume benchmarks, standard performance clauses. Nothing punitive, nothing personal, heavier. Derek was reading. I could picture it, the man in the charcoal suit, silver at the temples, 9 months of comfortable assumptions dissolving line by line as he worked through a document prepared by the wife he'd tried to throw out of her own family 4 days ago. 4 days, Derek Langford had turned our world upside down on a Monday night, and by Friday afternoon, his entire development lifeline was sitting in Emily Whitaker's hands in a building Harlan Whitaker owned. God has a sense of humor, he just doesn't always show his hand early. This is, Derek started, stopped. These terms are aggressive. I know they are, Emily said simply. I wrote them to be. More silence. Emily, Derek's voice had changed again, something underneath it now that hadn't been there when he walked in, something older, quieter, like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and could feel his grip finally going. What I said about your family, about your bloodline, I was wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things for a long time, and I told myself it was principle. No, it's okay, I forgive you. I appreciated that. The honest response of a woman who's been wounded and isn't pretending otherwise. The evaluation will run its course, Emily continued. Whatever happens professionally, but Lily and Jack need their father. Whatever that relationship looks like going forward, that's between you and God and your conscience. My jaw tightened in the hallway, not from anger, from recognition. Because that was the most honest thing Derek Langford had ever said in my presence, and he didn't even know I was there to hear it. Emily let the words sit, didn't rush to fill the space, didn't offer cheap comfort or easy absolution. She let the man breathe inside his own truth for a moment, which, if you ask me, was more grace than Derek Langford had earned, and more character than most women her age could have managed. I appreciate that, Emily said finally, steady, warm but not weak, genuinely. But I need you to understand something, Derek, not as a potential vendor. Not as my soon-to-be ex-husband, as a man. I stopped breathing. My father built something extraordinary, 32 years, quietly, without asking anyone's permission or approval or validation. Another beat. He built it for our family. For our name, for Lily and Jack. I could hear the steadiness in every syllable. No tremor, no performance, just truth. You looked at us and saw a bloodline that wasn't worthy. You made calls that cost me my marriage. You pressured me into considering walking away from everything my father stood for. The room was absolutely still, and somehow you ended up sitting across from me in our building, reviewing an agreement that determines whether your development even gets the local ag branding it needs to pass Act 250 and secure financing. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Then Emily slid something else across the desk, a pen. My father taught me that real power doesn't humiliate, it just makes things very, very clear. The silence that followed was the longest 8 seconds of my life. Then the quiet, unmistakable scratch of a pen moving across paper. Derek Langford signed the revised agreement. Emily signed it after him, calm, deliberate, the way a woman signs something she's already decided. Nobody said another word about bloodlines. Nobody made a speech. Nobody twisted the knife or raised a voice or did anything that needed to be done because nothing needed to be done anymore. Everyone in that room knew who won. Nobody said it out loud. They didn't have to. I walked downstairs, not into the meeting. I never went into the meeting. I walked out to the parking lot, stood next to my 2006 Ford pickup and looked up at the gray Vermont sky for a long, quiet moment. 32 years, not one day of it was about revenge, not really. It was about legacy, about building something so solid, so deep-rooted, that when the storm finally came for my family, it would have somewhere real to stand. I thought about my father pressing the deed to the original 40 acres into my hands with everything he had in his eyes. I thought about Emily at 12 picking apples like she owned the world. I thought about Lily and Jack in that old fire department cap, serious as judges, telling me their apple was a little sour but still good. Bloodline. Derek Langford had called our bloodline unworthy. This was our bloodline. A grandfather who built in silence, a daughter who showed up without flinching, grandkids who didn't know yet what was being preserved for them, but would spend the rest of their lives inside the proof of it. There is no amount of money. No condo development, no charcoal suit that measures that. I got in my truck, turned on John Prine, and drove home in my modest pickup from my company through my valley, the same way I'd driven home for 32 years, quietly. Completely undefeated, but the story wasn't over, not by a long shot, because Derek wasn't done fighting the paperwork. And the real test, the one that would stretch over the next 6 weeks and test every quiet alliance I'd built, was just beginning. Let me take you back a little further so it all makes sense. Because to understand how we got here, you have to understand how a man like me builds something this big without anyone noticing. I was 28 when I took over the original 40 acres from my father. It was 1987. Vermont was still recovering from the farm crisis. Dairy farms folding left and right. Apple prices were garbage. My dad handed me the deed and said, "Harlan, don't ever let them see what you've really got. They'll come for it." He died 2 years later, heart attack in the orchard while pruning. I buried him under the big maple by the river and promised myself I'd honor that warning. First 10 years I did everything the hard way. Worked the rows myself, hired 2 guys from town, sold at the farmer's market every Saturday. Emily was little then, 4, 5, 6, running between the trees in her boots, learning the difference between a Mac and a Spy by taste alone. Her mother, Sarah, would pack lunches and sit on the tailgate and watch us like we were the only show in town. We lived in the same white farmhouse, drove the same beat-up truck. Nobody suspected a thing when I quietly bought the distressed 60 acres next door in '92 for pennies on the dollar after the owner's bankruptcy. I paid cash from the savings I'd hidden in a coffee can in the barn. No bank, no paper trail anyone cared about. By the late '90s, I had 400 acres. Started a small pressing operation in the old dairy barn. Sold fresh cider to the local co-op. Still looked like just another small family farm, but I was watching how the big chains, Hannaford especially, were starting to push for local sourcing to meet customer demand. I formed the first LLC in 2001, named it after my grandfather's old horse, Legacy Holdings. Nobody connected it to the farmhouse on Route 7. Sarah got sick in 2008, cancer. Fought it for 3 years. In her last month, she made me promise I'd tell Emily the truth one day. When she's ready, she said, not before. I held her hand when she passed in the same bedroom where we'd brought Emily home from the hospital. Buried her under the maple next to Dad. The orchard was at 1,200 acres by then. 3 cold storage warehouses, contracts with 3 regional distributors. Still drove the same truck. Still wore the same jacket with the patched elbows. Emily went to UVM, studied library science because she loved books and quiet. Met Derek at a fundraiser in Burlington in 2014. He was 30, already climbing the development ladder, talking big about sustainable luxury communities that somehow always required tearing up farmland. I shook his hand at the wedding and saw the way he looked at my boots. Like they were evidence of something embarrassing. I smiled anyway, kept quiet. Over the next decade I expanded again. Bought out 2 more failing orchards during the 2018 price crash. Built the first distribution center in Burlington, 80,000 square feet, automated grading lines, contracts with every Hannaford in Vermont and New Hampshire. Then one in Albany for the New York market. One in Manchester for Massachusetts and beyond. Started supplying Citizen Cider and Harpoon and half a dozen smaller craft operations with our heirloom blends, Northern Spy, Roxbury Russet, the works. 20% of our crop went to hard cider now. The money rolled in quiet, reinvested every penny. By 2023, we were at 42 acres under management, including leased ground and water rights on another 18. 3 processing facilities, 180 full-time employees, annual revenue that would have made Derek's Boston investors drool. And still, to the world outside the gate, I was just old Harlan Whitaker with the modest farm and the modest truck. Derek never asked, never looked past the surface. He spent 10 years calling my life quaint and my values small town. He pushed Emily to move closer to Boston, to put the kids in private schools, to get out of the sticks. He talked about selling the farmhouse land for progress. I listened. I waited, I kept building. The Tuesday everything broke was the day after Columbus Day weekend, peak harvest. The air was thick with the smell of ripe fruit and the diesel from the tractors. I'd spent the morning in the South Block picking with a crew of 20, the kind of honest work that clears your head. Derek had shown up unannounced the night before, suit still on, telling Emily the appraisal on the farmhouse parcel was in and the developer was ready to close. "It's time to be realistic, babe," he'd said loud enough for the kids to hear. "Your dad's never going to make it big. This land is dead weight." That was the moment I decided the silence was over. After the meeting with Emily, after Derek signed the new terms, the real work began, because Derek didn't roll over easy. He spent the next 2 weeks making calls to his investors, to the town planning board, to the Act 250 District Commission. He thought he could pressure us by threatening to pull out of the supply deal entirely. He thought he could fast-track his luxury development, 80 high-end condos with orchard views and a private cidery on site, by leaning on the local ag incentives. He didn't know I sat on the county ag board, quietly, had for 14 years. Didn't know I held the senior water rights on the river stretch his project needed for irrigation and stormwater. Didn't know that half the planning board owed their seats to the quiet support I'd given over the years, not with money, but with jobs, with donations to the volunteer fire department, with keeping the local economy alive when the big dairy operations left. The first shot came 10 days after the signed agreement. Derek's lawyer sent a formal demand letter contesting the evaluation, claiming bad faith and threatening litigation. Emily brought it to me in the office that afternoon. The kids were in the on-site daycare we ran for employees, Lily learning how apples get graded, Jack stacking tiny crates like it was the best game ever. I read the letter once, then I picked up the phone and called Russell. "Activate the Act 250 file on the Langford parcel. Full opposition from adjacent landowner." Russell didn't ask questions, he knew. Act 250, Vermont's land use law since 1970, is no joke. It requires major developments to prove they won't wreck the environment, the economy, or the community. Derek's project was over 10 acres in a town without strong zoning. That triggered full review. And as adjacent landowner with 42 acres of active ag land, Whitaker legacy had standing. We filed detailed comments citing impacts on prime agricultural soils, water quality, traffic on the rural roads, and the historic settlement pattern Act 250 was designed to protect. I'd written half the criteria myself in quiet letters over the years. Derek's financing started to wobble by week 3. Banks don't like regulatory uncertainty. His Boston investors started asking hard questions when the local supply deal looked shaky. The cidery branding they'd promised for marketing, suddenly at risk. The tax incentives tied to local ag partnerships, hanging by a thread. I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. I just kept showing up at 6:45 every morning. Kept walking the rows with Emily now beside me, teaching her the difference between a good contract and a fair one, between pride and legacy. Lily and Jack started helping after school, Lily learning to drive the small electric cart through the orchards, Jack tasting cider blends like a pro. They asked questions. I answered every one. Derek showed up at the farmhouse one more time on a Saturday in late November. The leaves were gone, the first snow dusting the ground. He looked smaller somehow, suit still sharp, but the shoulders were slumped. Emily met him on the porch. I stayed inside by the wood stove, close enough to hear but not in the room. "I'm pulling the project," he said, voice rough. "The Act 250 hearing is going against us. Investors are out. Without the Whitaker supply deal and the branding, the whole thing collapses." Emily didn't interrupt. "I was wrong, Em, about everything. The bloodline stuff, the way I talked about your dad. I saw the books. I saw what he built." "I didn't see it before," she let him finish. "I'm asking for another chance, not for me, for the kids, for us." Emily was quiet a long time. Then she said, "The kids will always have you, Derek, whatever that looks like. But the marriage, that's between us and time. The business stays separate. You want the supply contract back under the new terms, sign the addendum. No more pressure. No more talk about selling the land." Ever, he signed it that afternoon on the same porch swing her mother loved. I watched from the window as he drove away in his leased Audi. No fanfare, no speeches, just the quiet click of a pen and the end of something that never should have started. That night we had dinner in the farmhouse, me, Emily, Lily, Jack, real dinner. Roast chicken from the neighbor's farm, apples from our trees baked into a pie. Lily asked why Grandpa's farm was so big now. I told her the whole story, age appropriate, how quiet building beats loud talking every time, how bloodlines aren't about money, they're about showing up. Jack fell asleep on the couch with his head in my lap. Lily curled up with a book about orchards. Emily sat across from me, the fire crackling, and said, "Thank you, Dad, for all of it." I nodded. "Thank your mother, she's the one who taught me what matters." 32 years. Not one day wasted, the orchards are still there, the company is still growing. Emily's running the business development side like she was born for it. Derek pays child support and shows up for weekends without a word about condos. The kids are learning the difference between sour and sweet the honest way, one apple at a time. And me, I still drive the old blue pickup, still show up at 6:45, still live in the white farmhouse with the swing on the porch. Some men spend their lives trying to prove they belong at the table. I built the whole damn orchard instead. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And as always, thank you for being a part of this community. I'll see you on the next one.